Hello everyone. On today's flight, we're going to experience the joys of operating a light sport aircraft. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the classifications of different aircraft, basically a light sport aircraft is pretty much the smallest aircraft you can fly. In the United States, there's actually a special license kind of reserved for this particular type of aircraft. And I saw this when I was on the org store the other day, and I said, hey, this might be a good time to kind of spread out to a size or a class that I don't normally operate. Generally, I don't fly things this small for a number of different reasons, but I thought this would be kind of a fun opportunity to try something different. And it turns out it's actually pretty cool. So what we're going to be doing today is, yeah, the weather's not particularly great. It's marginal VFR in case you're curious, but we're a light sport aircraft, so I'm not too concerned with that. Basically, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking off from way out here in western Massachusetts, and we're going to be scooting over to a different part of western Massachusetts as our cruise speed isn't particularly high. Just some quick little things in here. You can tell just by kind of me turning my head that there's really not a lot of airplane in here. And you have to kind of get used to that. I mean, that's our fuel gauge. It's this little thing just kind of hanging. Turning the fuel on is a matter of turning these little knobs back here. There's another one in the floor. There's a fuel pump literally behind here, and you can actually click this switch to suck fuel right out of the engines into the engine if you need it. And it's even got a little choke, like you might have like on a lawnmower or something like that. So it's definitely a different kind of aircraft, and it's kind of cool. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Starting planes like this are more close to starting a car than an airplane. We're going to reach over, go ahead and turn on our battery switch, shut our avionics off. We're going to flick on the strobe light just to give everybody a heads up that we're going to get started. Normally, stick your head out the window or whatever and yell the word clear or something like that, but we're fine. We're going to take the choke. We're going to pull the choke all the way out. And then all we do is crank it after giving us just a little bit of throttle. All right, let's try it. Yeah, I missed the magnetos, but it caught it for me. Okay, now this engine is a Rotax. I think it's a Rotax 912 or 921. Basically, it's a teeny tiny little engine that some of them actually will run on road fuel, which is, I think, kind of interesting from an aircraft perspective. Because, I mean, you could probably park this thing at a gas station and fill up if you need it. So a couple little kind of quirks with this aircraft, go ahead and flick on our avionics and our position light, is because it's so small, we don't even have a directional gyro on here. We have a compass, and of course we have a GPS, which gives us our true track, which is kind of nice. Another little quirk that this engine is this is an air and water-cooled engine. So because of that, if you take a look over at our cylinder head temperature gauge, you don't really have a lot of wiggle room as far as overheating this thing. So it's going to be kind of a constant little battle to do that. So I'm going to take off right away because I know we're heading in the direction. I don't want the weather to get worse before we get there. I have this chart. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give myself one notch of flaps. The flaps control is on the floor. You pull it back. Now these are gigantic, gigantic flaperons, which are a little obnoxious because they have a really, really nasty tendency to actually create more lift than they create drag. So it creates kind of an interesting problem when you go to land. Anyway, let's go ahead and do our lights, camera, action, and then get on course. So landing lights, we don't really need that today. That's fine. We got our position light. Make sure we're set with that, and we're ready to go. Now, this is a conventional landing gear aircraft. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to give it full power and just kind of hold the nose back just a little bit. Once the tail comes up, we're just going to apply just a teeny tiny bit more pressure to get going. All right, let's rock before this thing overheats. I'm not used to airplane engines getting all the way up to 5,000 RPM. That's kind of a new one for me. All right, so the nose has come up, and we just hold back, and we're in the air just like that. Now, I'm not used to takeoffs that are quite that gentle. That's actually pretty impressive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring up my one notch of flaps. I have two sets of flaps on here if I need them. One's basically takeoff. The second one is landing should you need it. Now, first thing we're going to have to deal with is we're going to have to deal with engine management. So I'm taking a look on my right, and I can see my cylinder head temperature is up to about 115, and it is climbing quick. So there's a couple different strategies we can use to mitigate that. One thing we could do right away, of course, is reduce power. But with this aircraft, if we reduce power, we're going to lose speed, and then we're actually going to increase our engine temperature increase. How about some redundancy for you? So obviously, that's just not viable. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to keep on climbing at about 70 miles an hour, and we're going to try not to get too close to those big scary clouds because we are an LSA aircraft after all. It's looking pretty good. Go ahead and push my nose over. And now we're going to go ahead and turn directly towards the east. Now, this aircraft doesn't have the world's most scientific owner's manual, which I always thought was a little weird personally. And it doesn't say, oh, use this power for this cruise, because these aircraft really aren't designed to be cruising crazy long distances or anything like that. So as a result, it basically says keep it in the green. So I find that 4,500 RPM seems to work pretty well for me. Alright, we are set. And that's it. So now we're just going to kind of cruise towards our destination, which is Great Barrington, for those of you guys who are curious. Go ahead and come over just a teeny tiny bit. Oh, carburetor icing. Go ahead and pull the carburetor. Obviously, it's a very humid day. You can tell by the sheer amount of humidity in the air, obviously the haze. So we have to be very, very careful of carburetor icing. Go ahead and give myself a little bit of trim. Now, this aircraft cruises very nose down. You can see with my vertical speed down there at the bottom that I'm tipped down about 3 or 4 degrees, and we're still picking up speed. So that's kind of interesting. Go ahead and flip up our, we don't want to go to Norway. That was the other day. That was a pretty fun flight, actually. We'll scoot up here, we'll scoot down here, scoot down here. We'll go ahead and zip through this real quick. Ooh, that was us. There we go. Go ahead and gently come to my right a little bit. And we were right on course the whole time. Okay, so normally in light sport aircraft, you want to stay within 50 nautical miles of the airport you took off from for, 100 different reasons. But in this particular, let's go ahead and reduce power just a little bit. There we go. Okay, but in this particular case, we're actually traveling. So yeah, weather is definitely marginal. I would not be flying this type of plane in the real world at this type of weather, but we'd like to make things exciting, don't we? If it ever goes to instrument conditions, we'll probably crash. It'll be fun. So a couple of the little quirks of the light sport aircraft. The first of which absolutely kills me, is the fact that it is not very stable in pitch. It's actually quite obnoxious to try to keep this thing properly trimmed. And the reason for that is every teeny tiny little updraft is going to completely unbalance this thing. And the way it accelerates quickly and decelerates quickly is just, it's a project to keep this thing going where you want it to go. It's actually very, very stable going straight, which I think is much to its credit. But again, it takes a very, very special hand. Now, in this particular area, I believe our MEA, it's our minimum en route altitude, is supposed to be around 1,700 feet. And yes, I did set the altimeter today, but we're going to stay relatively low because I want to be able to kind of take in some of the sights here. And again, I'm trying to give this the most gentle touch I can possibly touch, but this thing is constantly wandering up and down. It sort of reminds me of aircraft that have kind of like spring-loaded controls. Always have that problem of trying to get it where you want to go. Now, a couple of neat little quirks with this particular aircraft is it doesn't burn gas very quickly. We're carrying, I forget exactly what it is. We can actually check that out real quick. We carry, let's see here, looks like about 80 pounds of gas. It's probably, again, something that we just brought in a little red gas tank directly to the airfield with us today. So as a result, this teeny tiny little engine isn't going to burn that very quickly. But remember, we're not going very fast. The estimate you just saw on that page is about 7 hours at this current RPM. That's a little excessive, but then again, you're not going to be traveling more than 300-400 miles if you wanted to. The addition of GPS is absolutely wonderful in this particular plane. Without it, we'd have a really, really tough time getting around, because again, we're lacking some fundamental navigation instruments. But this is supposed to be a visual aircraft, and we're really supposed to be using pilotage anyway. Go ahead and give myself just a little bit more power. There we go. Alright, as soon as I give it that power, by the way, you'll notice the nose comes right up, even though I spend all that time trying to get this thing somewhat trim. That's just kind of the way this thing handles, and you do have to kind of get used to it. This thing's kind of fun for barnstorming, and I've done a little bit of work with it at kind of higher altitudes, maybe out in the Rocky Mountains and the Andes Mountains, things like that. But you'll notice we're missing some kind of critical controls as far as to manipulate that stuff mixture-wise, so you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're operating it. Another neat little quirk is there's this little light right here that tells you only have 0.8 gallons left, which is probably the you should probably rush home as soon as you can button thing. It actually has a little test button that just turns that sucker on to let you know that that light works. So apparently that's a fairly critical part of the operation of this particular aircraft. Go ahead and swing to our left a little bit. Again, this thing really, really wants to kind of wander on. Alright, our cylinder head temperature is okay at the moment. I would like it to be a little bit lower, but I know if I reduce my power, my speed's going to come down because of the incredible amount of drag this little guy creates, and it's just going to heat me right back up again. On our very, very hot summer days, obviously today it's a little cooler because we've got this nice rain that's coming down, cold weather front, you can actually overheat this thing. And I don't actually know the in-game consequence of overheating it, I just know that it's kind of a fun little game to try to play and to keep things interesting as you're cruising around. So we're pretty lucky because of all that cloud cover. The Earth is not heated up quite as bad, so turbulence isn't nearly as terrible as it usually is. Generally, this thing is like riding around in an unbalanced washing machine, especially at low altitudes like this. But we're actually managing fairly well at the moment. So I can see there's a little bit of traffic down there. I'm not 100% sure what highway that is, but it doesn't really have enough lanes to be a proper highway. But we could certainly find it and actually look it up on a road map and try to use that to get us to Great Barrington. But this is perfectly fine the way it is as well. Now I'm taking a look at that mountain to my right, and that thing looks pretty serious looking, so I don't want to get too close to it. Normally I'm a little more pedantic when it keeps to keeping this thing at a set altitude, but it likes to wander around so much with every teeny tiny gust of wind that it's just almost not worth it. So just a teeny bit of trim there. The trim control on the thing, by the way, is down there. Kind of hard to see, but a little teeny tiny thing. And I'm sure it's pretty fun to try to operate by hand when they fly in this thing. Alright, we're cruising along pretty well. Oh, starting to come back up again. Those mountains are making me just a little bit nervous, both from a turbulence perspective, as well as a, oh, we're going to crash into them perspective, especially with this visibility dropping quick. Got plenty of fuel on board, so I can always turn back and try to find that grass field again. Alright, gonna go ahead and gently swing to my left just a little bit here. This really is a gorgeous, gorgeous area in the real world if you've ever had a chance to fly or to drive through it. There's a lot of neat little shops. There's kind of really cool little kitschy restaurants that you'd never know about. This is also Tanglewood territory for those of you who like the arts. Of course, it's got over there in Lenox, kind of to our right, but we're okay where we are right now. A lot of farms, a lot of trees, and there's also an enormous amount of air accidents in this particular area. And you can kind of tell that I'm sort of tempting fate here flying in these particular conditions, but we'll be okay. I actually knew somebody who did mangle an aircraft, unfortunately, on one of these mountains, making the approach to this very airport. So it scares me a little bit, but at the same time, wish it didn't happen. Anyway, that definitely seems to be the right road to be following to get us to our destination. It looks like there's a bit of a mountain pass up there, so I'm going to go ahead and gently take us towards it. Again, I'm traveling fairly nose down at the moment. If I wanted to use a slightly higher cruise power, like if I wanted to go up to, say, 100 miles an hour, the nose down effect would get very, very dramatic. We can deal with that, of course, by shifting the center of gravity backwards, but that actually makes the pitching problem and the trim problem much more complicated because, again, the further back your center of gravity is, the less stable it will be when you are traveling like this. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. Another kind of weird quirk with this aircraft is it says in the manual that whenever you're flying this plane, you should always have something you can land on pretty much in visual range, or I should say in gliding range, because if you have an engine failure, the aircraft has so much drag that it basically, you're not going to get very far before you're going to have to stick it into the ground somewhere. So anyway, let's continue. I saw a blinking beacon up ahead. I always hate these gigantic bars. Some old aircraft have these as well, but it's kind of a common quirk to planes like this. That is our beacon. Now, this aircraft, because of the way the flaps are configured, when you deploy them, I swear it increases more lift than it ever creates drag. So as a result, we have to approach at a very, very low angle. Using the standard 3-degree angle that you're probably comfortable with is going to result in far too much speed, and it's going to make it very, very uncomfortable to land. Another quirk, as you guys probably saw from outside, is we have conventional / tail dragger landing gear. Because of this, I know immediately that we're going to have to go and do a 2-point landing. I've seen many people try to do 3-point landings with conventional landing gear aircraft, both in the real world as well as in simulators, and it tends to become a 9-point or a 12-point or a 15 as you bounce down the runway. I just find it's much, much safer and easier to control a 2-point landing. So that means we're going to have to come in just a touch faster. Okay, so I checked the wind and all that other good stuff before I took off today, so I know that the wind is actually coming from the direction we're facing, which again makes us go even slower if you've been following the ground speed over there on the GPS in the bottom right corner. Okie doke. Now, I'm going to go ahead and reduce power. I'm not going to pull power back all the way. Now watch what happens. If you were to pull power back all the way, watch what happens to your ADI. Yep, there it goes. There's not actually enough pressure to run it anymore. So I'm going to leave this right around 1600 RPM. Now what's going to happen is as soon as you kill that power, all that extra drag that you're going to generate is going to slow you down like you hit some kind of air brake. I can actually pull the nose back to get it to slow down even quicker. And now we're approaching stall territory. but you can see that this thing just has no inertia when it's flying. It's really good in slow flight because you can put your flaps down. You can fly this thing kind of almost backwards in a strong headwind. You can see we're doing about 38 ground speed at the moment, so it gets pretty slow. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and re-increase the power, and then we're going to go ahead and get our approach. This particular runway, it's perfectly good length for us. It's in a pretty good position. Our angle right now, it does seem like we're a little low, but given this aircraft's handling properties, it's just easier to come in closer to 2 instead of 3 degrees. I've done a little bit of experiments with this thing, going uphill, downhill, crosswind, all those other good things. Really, it's just easier to come in a little lower than you're used to approaching. Obviously, don't hit any of the flora or fauna on your way down also. Okay, so we're pretty good distance out. That looks like 2 1/4 miles. I'm going to go ahead and deploy my first notch of flaps. Notice there's not really much of an upset. The biggest upset is when I add or remove power. That tends to make the nose pitch up or down. Go ahead and give myself a lot of trim here to make this just a little bit easier to approach. Also going to skid just a teeny tiny bit so I can kind of keep an eye on the end of the runway right now. And this thing is barely crawling. My ground speed right now is pushing about 46, and my airspeed says it's about 60. Keep in mind those are not oranges to oranges kind of a comparison because it's in miles per hour, but it's safe to say there's probably a good 8 or 9 knot headwind. We're also getting pushed ever so slightly off the center line as well. Okay, go ahead and line myself up. You can see the giant beacon tower. Man, that's an easy one. Okay, so this is actually a little higher than I want to be, so I'm going to be very, very careful on my power as I come down. Carburetor heat I already pulled out because I know that, again, we don't want to get any carburetor icing that's going to make us crash. Oh, this is a pretty good spot. I'm going to go ahead and put my last notch of flaps down. The manufacturer does not recommend using full flaps in a crosswind situation. This isn't really that bad of a crosswind situation, so I'm not too concerned. Now I'm coming in much too high. Like I said, this aircraft almost feels like a motor glider sometime when you leave the power in just a little bit. Obviously, I could cut the power and do our little slow flight like we did a minute ago, but of course, as you can see, my ADI pops up, or the little off flag pops up to tell me there's not enough vacuum in the engine to actually run my instruments. In the real world, of course, that would cause that instrument to tumble, which would be terrible, but fortunately, we're in a simulator, and things seem to still kind of work, which I'm kind of happy about. Because that would be very frustrating. I actually had a flight once where the ADI decided to take a tumble halfway through the flight. And it was very dramatic because it just sort of looked at me, tilted to the side, and bounced around rapidly, and I thought something had broken inside of it. That was not fun. Fortunately, it was not an instrument flying day, so I wasn't too affected by it. Okay, let's go ahead and land this thing on the ground. Again, we're going to be doing a 2-point landing, so we're actually going to land flat. The trick to that is to get really close to the ground. I'm actually getting a little too fast here, but I got plenty of runway. Get very, very close to the ground, and then basically hover and add just a teeny tiny bit of power in order to keep the thing level. All right, pretty good amount of crosswind. Okay, so we're going to get nice and close to the runway, and we're just going to let the 2 wheels touch, just like that. Now, in X-Plane, ground looping is a really, really annoying thing to deal with, so I tend to use the X-Plane anti-lock brake method, where you just basically rapidly tap the brake button in order to get the thing to slow down enough to actually go. I don't have separate toe brakes, so I have to kind of deal with that. Anyway, we are here, and we did not crash and die on this marginal day. All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully this encourages you to try out a light sport aircraft from the X-Plane universe. They're really, really cool. They're very, very bumpy, so be kind of aware for that if you have any sort of a day like that. All right, enjoy.